Hello, everybody. I am going to do part two of our lecture. If you haven't watched part one, you should go back and do that. Okay, so the causes of poverty. There are two major theories about this. Both of them are mildly offensive. The culture of poverty theory is essentially that you grow up in a setting where poverty is normal and everything around you kind of works to perpetuate it. It's just kind of like what your microculture is about, living paycheck to paycheck or benefit check to benefit check or whatever it is. Um, payday loans, that sort of thing that you learn by being born into it, that that poverty is normal and that's how you should live. Um, yeah, problem, right? So the biggest downfall to this is that it definitely blames the individual. I don't like the word victim in general. We can talk about that in as much detail as you like, but victim is not a word I use. Um, the point here is that individuals are responsible for their own situation, and that if they wanted to, they could essentially pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and it's not a societal issue, right? So this, if you think back to was it last week, the charity organization societies, right? They kind of this is a theory that goes right along with that, which is that the issue is one on an individual level. It gets fixed on an individual level, and it's not important to pay any attention to societal context. So the other way to look at it is the functionality of poverty theory. This is really depressing because basically what this theory states is that our society is set up in such a way that we need poor people, right? We need poor people to do the jobs for no reasonable pay, that people don't want to do, who are not in poverty, right? And yeah, super depressing theory, right? But if you think about it, this is a very exosystem and mesosystem and macrosystem way to think about this, which is that, like, basically, the structure of our society is set up in such a way as to keep you poor. And I think that the some of the stuff that we're seeing now about the pandemic and essential workers, and they're getting sicker at higher rates for a multitude of reasons, but not the least of which is that they're working these jobs that have this, like, critical role in the economic structure of our country, but they don't get paid enough to be able to have the money set aside to make a different decision about what kind of work that they want to do, or to take off work if they're not feeling well, right? So the coronavirus goes ripping through these lower end jobs because these folks don't have any other options, right? So it's these things are not mutually exclusive, right? The culture of poverty theory and the functionality of poverty theory, they're not mutually exclusive. Both of these things are at play together. It's just that how you solve it, the solutions depend on where you kind of want to put your emphasis. And spoiler alert, you can't solve these without focusing on both, right? You can't address poverty without kind of dealing with both sides of this. Because there is a very real way in which, generationally, if you are being taught by your caregiver that this is just how you get through the month. You get through the month by going and getting a payday loan. You get through the month by buying gas $1 at a time or whatever. Then that's kind of just what you understand as normal, right? So you have to kind of work on that, but also at the same time, you have to kind of look at the larger structure of the whole situation about like these jobs that don't pay very much, and how that works in our economic system, right? So there's been some work on this with regards to, say, making the minimum wage higher, and with the idea that you're going to give folks, even at the kind of lower end of the economic spectrum, you're going to give them the freedom, the ability to not be poor, right? So it's in progress. Okay, so these numbers have changed quite a lot in terms of unemployment, but the thing that I want to focus on is not so much the absolute number so much as it is about underemployment and working poor. So underemployed folks, like, okay, so these are people who don't work enough hours or not paid enough, or, and I should have added this into the slide and I didn't, but underemployment also includes working at a level lower than you could. So for example, I have a bachelor's degree and 2 master's degrees. And if I were to go and work in a grocery store, and then I would be getting a call from the folks who gather the statistics about employment, and they asked me the relevant questions, I would be considered underemployed, because I would be working well below what my education and experience would suggest. So that includes underemployment includes that sort of situation. So the working poor, I feel like that's probably pretty obvious. It's like you're working, like, however many jobs you're working as hard as you can, you're working a million hours, but you're still poor. Okay, so the minimum wage situation is pretty dire. If functionally in the real world, there is no way to make ends meet in almost any location, as far as I'm aware, making minimum wage, like without any other additional income. Like, think about what happens if you get sick, right? Like, what if you get sick? Most minimum wage jobs don't come with benefits, right? Like you end up working like 39 hours a week or something, because then you're not considered full-time. That's a thing that employers do. And then you don't have any benefits, right? You don't have any health insurance, all that stuff. So this gets really, really, really tricky, even when you're just an individual, and then you start adding in family members, and you can see, again, back to the feminization and juvenilization of poverty, how, female-headed families end up in the hole pretty fast. Okay, so income distribution. I'm going to simplify a little bit. The situation is this. In recent years, the disparity in how rich people are and how poor people are has gotten a lot bigger. Okay, and the last, probably since it's on the slide actually, since the 80s, the income disparity has gotten much wider. That has a lot to do with the economic policies from the Reagan administration and everything that came after. And before Reagan came along, the tax structure was such that there was obviously income disparity. There always has been. you know, it's just how our economy works, but the disparity has gotten wider and wider and wider. That's what I want you to take away from this slide. Okay, so poverty and race. This is where, if you weren't depressed already, you're going to get a whole lot more depressed. Okay, so median income for households by race. Oh dear, right? So the fact that median income for white households is almost twice what it is for African American and Latino households should give you some really serious pause. About why that is, about what the structures are in our society and in our economy that make that true. You know, what is it about how our society is that creates a situation where there is that big a disparity? And you know, how many isms come into this, right? How many racism, sexism, you know, how many isms do we have about this? Okay, so poverty by race. Again, big problems here, right? So all people below poverty, less than 10% for white folks, African American folks, almost a quarter, right? And for Latino folks, more than 1/5. I probably should have changed all of the stuff on this slide to Latinx, but I'm sorry, I didn't think about that before I started the presentation. I will do that for next semester. Okay, so for families below poverty, you know, the numbers you see what the situation is, right? Where it gets interesting is where you look at female-headed families below poverty, right? So yeah, I mean it's higher. Sort of depressingly higher for African American and Latino than white, but also, I mean, 1/5 of female-headed families below poverty, white families, even white families, right? So, you know, there's something really salient here about female-headed families, right? Okay, homelessness and housing. All right, so I think that what I want to emphasize on this slide is what I added to it. So the blue bit at the bottom here. There's more than just the obvious costs of poverty, right? The obvious costs of poverty are obviously, you know, homelessness and housing issues because you can't really afford it, you know, the personal costs, you know, around health and education and drug use and dangerous living situations. All of that stuff is 100% true, but there's also social costs, right? So when we talk about child welfare, we're going to talk a lot about how race and poverty kind of plays into child welfare services. So we're going to get to that, but also, you know, there are costs around the deprioritization of culture. So like of both cultural involvement. So, you know, like art and music and all of those things, because you know you are so busy like trying to get your core needs met, you really don't have time for all that stuff. But also this also has another meaning, which is that, you know, there's a deprioritization societally around the culture of folks who tend to be poor, right? So if you go back and look at the previous slides and you go, you know, oh gosh, you know, a third of African American families, a third of Latino families are experiencing poverty. Also, what that comes along with is kind of additional, very heavy aspects of racial erasure, right? So you can't really tease these two things apart. You can't really pull apart poverty and race when they're so kind of tied together, and then the aspects of culture get erased, of the cultural subset is what I mean. They get erased from the larger culture because these people are poor and they're not of the dominant race, which is of course white, right? So there's a real social cost to that. Like we're supposedly living in this society that is supposed to be this great, respectful, um, you know, um, very, I don't know, multicultural, uh, and it's not as equitable as it should be, right? Okay. And then employment and social ostracization, which is a word I can barely say. These things also come into play, right? Because if you look at the assignment that you have for this week, like for example, if you're poor, and say you're homeless, you're going to have a hard time putting together a presentable and clean outfit to go and do a job interview, for example. Okay, so there are some programs to address poverty. They are discussed in your book, and we have discussed them previously. SNAP is food stamps. Okay, so social welfare programs. Again, you're gonna sense a theme here. They fall into two categories. We have the psychosocial interventions, right, that focus on the individual and small scale solutions, right? Pardon me. And work on folks improving their employability and making more money and that sort of thing. And then the advocacy is more about public policy. Well, what does it sound like to you, right? So, right. So we're talking about the different levels of the system, right? So just kind of be aware as we go through, we're going to see this theme over and over and over again, right? We're going to see the theme where there's like always this kind of dichotomy of interventions, that one is like this very individual based, very small scale, very micro level kind of intervention, and then there's this kind of higher level public policy kind of intervention on the meso exo or macro levels. Okay, so poverty, very complicated topic. There's a lot to talk about. I'm hoping that there's going to be a really great conversation in the discussion this week. Please remember that your initial post is due Wednesday at 11:59 p.m. So essentially before you go to bed on Wednesday. And then your reply post is due Saturday at 6 p.m. As always, if you have any questions, come to my Zoom office hours. If they don't work for you, no problem. We'll find another time. All right. Talk to you soon.